Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming to this social talk. It's not so often that members of our own Caltech community give talks on their own personal interests outside of science, so I'm really excited for this. I think these are things that we talk about in person, but since we're not all in person now and we're over Zoom, I think it's a great idea to try to make this effort to do things that are fun. And I'd just like to introduce Women in BBE, which is the group sponsoring this talk. My name is Jess, and I'm one of the co-chairs of Women in BBE. And Wen, our presenter today, is also on the board of Women in BBE. And if you haven't heard of us, we started as a group almost 2 years ago, not quite 2 years ago yet, but we've started doing events and programming really rapidly. And our group's purpose is to be a supportive community of women within the division, connecting members across all stages in career and walks of life. So this includes staff, postdocs, graduate students, undergraduate students, and faculty, and anybody else affiliated with the division, whether, kind of doing work in biology, um, or people that have been in the Caltech BBE division but have moved on in their career. So we really want to connect everybody, all stages of career and walks of life, with resources for personal and professional growth. So we have events promoting professional development. We have a mentorship program, and we also work on advocating for broader support of our community members. And we use a inclusive and broad definition of woman. And a lot of our events are open to everybody. So what do I get as a member of the WIBI community? So this is just some of the events that we've done, and I'm including Wen's event here. So we've done tie-dye events of women in BBE shirts. That's like a family-friendly event. We've had ice cream socials. We've had, holiday parties with photo booths. We host Meet the Speaker series with women scientists that come to give talks in BBE, and we get to hear about their personal lives and advice through lessons they've learned in their career. We provide postdoc and new student welcome kits, and professional development programs. We also have, really connected a lot of people with the women faculty in our own department, and hearing their stories. So I'm pretty excited about what WIBI has accomplished in the past 2 years. My screen is, there we go. And this is our board. So we have co-chairs, and also people responsible specifically for mentorship and advocacy and events. And Marianne Bronner is our faculty mentor. And we also collaborate with a bunch of different groups on campus for programming. And I know it says best of luck with your application process. I just presented this to a recruitment event the other day. So I'm glad you guys are already part of the Caltech community, but we're trying to also get new students that are looking at Caltech to be excited about this. But if you are interested in learning more about women in BBE, you can reach out to Wen, you can reach out to me. We have a website under the Caltech website, so you can just look up Women in BBE. We have a mailing list that you can also join to hear about our events in a Slack. So we're really looking for our community members to get involved in whatever way possible. If you have an idea for an event, if you want to host an event, if you want to mentor a woman in BBE, if you just want to hear about, the issues that we're advocating for and care about, like those are all things that we do. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Wen, who is here and she's put together an awesome presentation about Chinese attire in celebration of Lunar New Year. So yeah, I don't want to take up any more time. So please, Wen, teach us about this awesome clothing.
Thank you, Jess. I'm so excited to see all of you here. This is the first time I give an online talk about Chinese culture. I used to give talk at the Caltech Alum House every Chinese New Year to introduce a topic about the Chinese culture. And this talk is about traditional Chinese attire. By the way, I graduated from Caltech in year 2000 with a PhD in BBE, and I have been working as a scientific curator in the past 21 years. So I make a living by reading scientific literature, extract the information, and present them to the scientific community. So one day I suddenly came out with this idea, like I can read scientific literature, and why don't I read other literature in my spare time and craft talks to serve the community with my knowledge. So today I'm going to present you my research about Chinese attire. I'm going to show my slides here. Let me see, okay, show from the beginning. Okay, so speaking about traditional Chinese attire, most of you may just think about a qipao, but 2000 ago, Chinese people were already famous in the world for producing silk and embroidery and dyes. And in ancient China, in every government, there was always a Ministry of Rights. It's almost like our Department of Education today. So clothes is a very important part of Chinese culture because no matter one's poor or rich, dress properly is very, very important in the ancient Chinese society because it presents your respect to the society and presents your personal character. And so there are different attires defined for different jobs. For example, farmers had farmers' clothes and students had student clothes. So if you walk on the street of ancient China, you can look at each individual from how they dress themselves, what kind of hat they wore. You can immediately tell the profession of this person. And the Ministry of Rights is in charge of defining what should people wear, what color should people wear, according to their rank in the government, according to their social status, what kind of material they should use. And Ministry of Rights is also in charge of ceremonies. They are in charge of all the music performances. They're in charge of all the dances and all the decorations of any ceremony. And also ancient China, people were very, very spiritual, because Chinese people believe that they were descendants of the divine. They were descendants of the immortals. And in ancient Chinese teachings, everything came from heaven. For example, my background showed ancient Chinese characters. It was believed that an immortal or god called Cangjie created these characters. And Chinese people also believed that Chinese medicine was a gift from heaven because the gods gave it to ancient Chinese people and let them pass down. And same thing for clothes. They also believe clothes is a gift from heaven. So it's not surprising to understand that ancient Chinese religions, the three major religions, Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism, tremendously influenced traditional Chinese attire. And let's start from Buddhism. This is one of the paintings in 10th century showed like a Buddhism story. So you can see this Bodhisattva wore a very pretty necklace. In Chinese, it's called yingluo. It was a very big piece of jewelry made from many gemstones, pearl, and precious metal. And this actually yingluo came from India. It was part of the Buddhism decoration. And also became popular in China because Chinese women wear them on their neck as necklace or on the wrist or on the arm. But this is probably the only part we can see tremendous Buddhism influence in Chinese history, because the way ancient Indians wear is very different from Chinese. After Buddhism came to China, Chinese people did not like Indian clothes because India was very warm, and in China that kind of outfit didn't fit. So Chinese Buddhists, they wore traditional Chinese clothes. So that actually originated from Taoism. So Taoism was native religion in China. It had 4,000 years of history. And this is one of the paintings in 7th century with a Taoism theme. It's called 87 Immortals. So that described the story of 87 immortals marched to see their heavenly father, and they all wore traditional Chinese clothes. And you can immediately tell from this painting that they have one important feature is like they all had very wide flowing sleeves. And that is indeed the basic style of traditional Chinese clothes. In all the formal occasions, Chinese people, men or women, they always wear this basic two-piece set. They had a shirt and they had skirt. And this kind of shirt and skirt style, they can have many kinds of alternates because they layer them. Sometimes people can wear as many as 12 layers of skirts and form a different kind of patterns. And another feature of Chinese clothes is like they have this had this cross collar, like they have the left panel cover the right panel, and that was a reason for that because left in Chinese culture means yang, the sun, the brightness, and the right side is called yin, the darkness. So with left covering right means you have brightness covering the darkness. So that gave people a positive feeling, say like you have brightness cover darkness, that your life is full of energy. And also these kind of clothes, they were secured together with sashes or straps. Ancient Chinese people never used buttons. Everything was secured together with straps or sashes. And look at this painting on the right. It was from 7th century about one of ancient Chinese emperors. And he was wearing this kind of shirt and skirt style. But take a look at the shoes he wore. Isn't that interesting? Like this kind of shoes pointing upward. And I always wonder, like, why they designed this kind of shirts, like shoes. Can you imagine, like in the ancient times, like all the royal court families, they wore like these giant skirts, and if they accidentally step on themselves, they would fall, and that would be like really awkward. So to prevent this kind of dilemma, they invented this kind of special kind of shoes or boots. They can rest their long skirt on the top of the boots, and they will never trip. And that was very smart creation. And also look at his hats. Like this is like almost like a crown. Like you saw many like Chinese ancient paintings. Emperors wore these kind of hats. In Chinese, it's called a mian. Means the sun, like the aura of the sun. That means like it has like 12 strings of gemstones in front of his face, and another 12 strings of gemstones back of his face. So in ancient China, emperors were called son of the heaven. So, people were not supposed to look at his face. So having these kind of things, like have a mask in front of himself, nobody can see his face clearly. And also because of these strings, like they can dangle easily. So when he walked around, he had to make sure that he had a very good posture and keep himself still. And this kind of design also had its symbolic meaning to remind the emperor, like he should always keep a righteous thoughts and always need to keep calm when he make any decision, because a small decision can tremendously influence the country. So ancient China, men always wore hats in formal occasions because ancient Chinese men and ancient Chinese women, they never ever cut their hair. Can we imagine once born and never cut their hair in the whole life? Because in Chinese culture, hair is a connection between them and their parents. It was a gift from their parents. Only when one become a monk or nun, they would cut their hair. That means they're disconnected from their family. There's no more family relationship. That's the teachings of Buddhism. But otherwise, they kept their hair all their life. They grew very, very long. And although men wear hats, like women, they can play with their hats, can make numerous, hundreds or thousands of different hairstyles. And this is one of the paintings in 4th century about how ancient Chinese women did their hair in front of copper mirrors. So this kind of a hairstyle evolved from dynasty to dynasty. And here's another painting in 4th century or 5th century about court women at that time, you see like they had this hairstyle in cross shape decorated with gold. They had like a wide sleeve and a skirt with sashes. And one of these ladies was wearing this striped pattern skirt. And that seemed to be a fashion at that time because that lasted for at least 200 years. In some of the paintings at that time, they were dyed. They dyed fabric into patterns and made them into dress. And you see, like one of these paintings was a musician in early Tang Dynasty, 7th century. The musicians wore this kind of patterned skirt, and they also played Chinese harp and Chinese flute. You may be surprised. Chinese people actually favored harp 2,000 years ago. It was popular for almost 1,000 years, and then gradually disappeared in Chinese history. And nowadays, Chinese people did not even remember how harps were played in the ancient times. But another feature you may notice is this very interesting hairstyle of these musicians. And we saw this in many entertainers' paintings or sculptures. This is a sculpture of an ancient Chinese dancer, also in 7th century. And this kind of hairstyle was called a celestial hairband. It was like a described, they saw like in the heaven, like heavenly ladies wore this kind of elaborate hairstyle. It was very complicated to make, and they also wear this kind of like a very wide leg pants when they dance. But these are only for performances. In the daily life, they never wore anything like that because it was so inconvenient. So this is a painting about in early Tang Dynasty, how the court ladies dress themselves. And so one thing you have to remember that Chinese people, every dynasty, they followed the style of the royal courts, because every dynasty was ruled by one family. So whatever the family preferred, the whole country would follow. So for Tang Dynasty, when Tang Dynasty in 7th century was first established, Emperor Tang Taizong realized that, okay, the nation, they are very short of money. They had a financial difficulty. So he and his queen decided that they would live a simple life. So they wore a very simple life. That means the whole nation would follow the emperor's style. So in Tang Dynasty, they actually preferred narrow sleeves, because narrow sleeves and slim dress means like they use much less fabric. So that became the style of early Tang Dynasty. But after 100 years, the dynasty, Han China, became very wealthy. And you can see the way people dress themselves changed a lot because, Chinese women started to use a ton of fabric and silk to make very elaborate decorations. And their dresses, use so much fabric that they would, drape to the floor. And they also used a lot of hair. They even bought fake hair, because poor women would sell their hair to rich women to make their wigs. And they had put a ton of decorations to the hair. And at that time, the lifestyle was so luxurious that the emperor had to issue an order. It was an interesting order that, no women in the country should have their bun higher than 1 foot tall. You can imagine that must be very tall. And the sleeves cannot be more than 4 feet wide. And the skirt cannot use more than 12 yards of fabric. Wow. When you look at these orders, say wow, women at that time, they must be really into this clothes making stuff. But in Tang Dynasty was the pinnacle of Chinese culture between 7th to 10th century. And that dynasty was quite unique because they actually preferred athletic, plump women. And women at that time, they actually played sports. And they also welcomed foreigners to China. In the capital of China, Chang'an, about 100,000 foreigners lived there, and they brought culture from all over the world. It's almost like nowadays in the United States, people all over the world traveled to U.S. to study. In 7th century, people all over the world traveled to China to study or do business. And this is a painting about Tang Dynasty women. They went out for hiking. They ride horses, and one of the most popular sports among men and women was soccer. They actually played soccer at that time. Of course, it's different soccer from today's soccer, but looked similar. It was made from fabric with stuffed fabric ball. They kicked the soccer around. But that only lasted for 300 years. Unfortunately, every dynasty fell with the corruption of the royal family, and eventually they were replaced. And after 10th century, China gradually closed its door. Like they became less and less isolated, less and less open, and more isolated. And Chinese people started to prefer clothes with colors close to nature. Like in Tang Dynasty, they preferred vibrant colors. They like to show their curve. They like to show their skin. But in later on, Chinese people became more and more conservative. And so for quite a few dynasties, this is a 5 dynasty in 10th century and Song dynasty, and then in 15th century painting. This is one of 15th century painting about countryside women. And you can see they actually they started to prefer skinny women instead of fat athletic women. So the standard of beauty changed. But you can see the way they dress themselves also became modest. The right side is a painting about court women. You can see they really liked skinny women at that time, although they had lovely hairstyle, but they all cover themselves really well. They all wore this kind of clothes that did not show any curve, like a straight line clothes to cover themselves without showing any curve of the body. And even after Manchurians took over China in 17th century, the Han Chinese people still wore this kind of clothes. The style did not change much, although Chinese people started to pay more and more attention to texture and the details because the technology improved a lot. They can play a lot with the details or embroidery. And this is one of the paintings of children playing with their mothers. And you may wonder, how did ancient Chinese children just at that time? This is one of the paintings about children playing in the winter, and 2 kids were playing with their kitten. And this is a boy, he wore his shirt and pants. Usually ancient Chinese people did not wear their pants. But for kids, they wore pants because they were very active. They also had their kids' hairstyle to make it convenient, easy for them to move around. And this girl actually wore a one-piece outfit called shenyi. So now I'm going to talk about another kind of Chinese clothes, the one-piece style. We've been talking about this shirt and skirt, and we know they are great for all formal occasions, but for men, it's really tedious to put layers and layers of shirts and skirts. They prefer something easier to put on themselves. So 2,000 years ago, Chinese people already had this invention. They say, okay, we are going to sew shirts and skirts together and make it one piece, like a dress. So women's style, they had this extended flap to wrap around their body. And the men's style was different. They had a slit here. So it was open, at the right side of the body. And you may wonder why they had a different style from men from women. Because in ancient China, upper class women were not supposed to show their legs. They were not supposed to let people see their pants. So with this wrapped style, it made sure their underwear would never be seen. And this kind of wrap style also forced them to walk in tiny steps. People 2,000 years ago thought that was very elegant. But for men, with kind of this slit, they can walk in big steps. They can ride horses. They can do a lot of work. It became easier for them. But you can imagine, women in this kind of clothes was really uncomfortable, although they looked elegant. This is one of the sculptures of musicians and dancers in Han Dynasty, 2,000 years ago. They looked elegant, but just look at this kind of clothes, I wouldn't want to wear them because it's so inconvenient. So this female style shenyi, the wrapped around style, only lasted for 200 years. Eventually it was abandoned. Chinese women went back to this shirt and skirt style and for the rest of the 2,000 years. But the men liked that. Men liked this kind of one piece because it was so convenient. So it became a standard outfit for ancient Chinese men, in their daily life, whenever they had no important occasion, every day, day to day, this is what they wore, especially among scholars. This is one of the paintings in 13th century about Chinese scholars. You saw most of them wore this kind of one-piece style, a shenyi. But this man had something different. He's also wearing a one-piece style, but it's a different one. It's called a paofu. It actually came from foreigners. So remember why Chinese people built the Great Wall? Because Huns in northern China kept invading us. So Chinese people had to build the wall. I'm not getting political here, but the wall did work for hundreds of years. But the Chinese people, they were also open-minded. While they had difficulty defeating the Huns, they noticed like the Huns were so powerful because they had a good outfit. Because Huns were this kind of like a one-piece thing. They just cut a hole in the middle of the fabric, and they had a slits on the side, and they wore boots and pants inside. They can ride horses. They can have battle. And Chinese emperor, especially in the Tang Dynasty, Emperor Tang Taizong, he really, really liked this because this emperor, he always rode horses, even when he traveled around. So that became his daily wear, even for the royal courts. So because of his promotion, Pao Fu became popular in China. It came from Hans and became a traditional Chinese attire for the rest of 1300 years. And you can see, for the rest of the time, most of Chinese men, they wore Pao Fu or Shen Yi, this kind of one piece. It's easy to wear. They always wore boots. So that became their day-to-day wear. And Pao Fu, even in 16th century, became the official attire for Chinese government officials. So this is one of the paintings of the Chinese royal courts in 16th century. You can see this is the emperor. To his right side are the scholars, wore Pao Fu and their hats, and wore a Shen Yi, with their hats. And this side were government officials. They were different colors of Pao Fu, like this one-piece set, and they had different patterns on their back to show their rank. So they had a different color to show their rank. I think the burgundy is the highest level of officials rank, and they had different patterns to show at the back to show the details in this big rank what's their detail of the rank. So that was kind of interesting. This original style came from Hans, became official wear in China for hundreds of years. But then Manchurians came. Manchurians is a northern Chinese ethnic group. They invaded China and took over the whole nation. And Manchurians, they are not Han Chinese, so they abandoned ancient Chinese clothes. They had their own outfit. But still, they were also open-minded because their culture was also heavily influenced by Chinese culture. So you see, Manchurians, they had their own outfit. They had this kind of style, but it's also the cross collar from left to the right. Remember, I presented before, the left means brightness and right means darkness. So it's the same design, they want brightness to cover darkness. So it's interesting to see these elements in many different ethnic groups of China. They all share some very similar value because they want to reflect this value, traditional value, in how they dress themselves. So these are the emperor's outfits. They had their own hat, Manchurian hats, and especially women, they had these giant hats decorated with flower and with their hair tied on top. This is one of the famous Chinese empress Cixi. And with this was the last dynasty of China. And in early 20th century, the Qing dynasty ended, and the Manchurian outfit gradually started to evolve. First, they became the day wear like this. It was a long-sleeved dress. And then they became nowadays what we're familiar with, Chinese qipao, because they made it really curvy and a fit. And this is what you see a lot. Whenever you see Chinese traditional attire, think about qipao. Yes, that's true, because qipao was popular for at least 100 years because of Manchurian's rule. And qipao in Chinese means Manchurian dress. Qi means Manchurian. Pao means dress. So, and then with the end of the rule of the Manchurians, China entered the Mingguo era. That was, for a period of time, for 40 years, China was, we call it democrat China. And so in democrat China, people actually had a lot of exchange with other countries. Many elite families sent their children to study in Western countries. So you can see in this picture, during these 40 years, Chinese people actually, many of them were Western outfit. They also wore like a Manchurian style, and especially Chinese female students. They had this very interesting like a Mingguo style. They had this standing collar top with skirts, and they usually wear like ties and leather like shoes. It was quite stylish at that time. And even that actually lasted for like 40 years until the Communist Party came. And unfortunately, the Communist Party, they eradicated traditional Chinese attire because Communist Party, they originated from Soviet Union. So to them, they believe that they want to build a new world. So anything from history was regarded evil, especially during the Great Cultural Revolution between 1966 and 1976. They actually destroyed almost every piece of antique they can find in China. And you can imagine at that time, nobody dared to wear any traditional Chinese clothes, not a qipao, not a Han Chinese style, not even high heel. If you wore high heel to the street, you'll be caught and the heel will be cut and you could be arrested. If any woman wore qipao or like Chinese traditional Chinese attire, and she can be sentenced to death prison. So like at that time, everyone was interesting, like the style during the Cultural Revolution was military uniform. And that was probably the safest style because that's called a Communist Party style. I grew up in China after the Cultural Revolution. Until I was 16 years old, all I had was military uniform. You can imagine I went to college with only military uniform. It was really awkward, but that was all I had from my parents. So like later on, gradually nowadays, Chinese people became more and more open, started to accept Western clothes. And, you go to China now, like the way people wear is not much different from other countries. And only on the stage, you see some traditional Chinese clothes. But I noticed that the style in modern China or mainland China is quite different from Chinese communities in other parts of the world. I noticed like it's called communist red, because nowadays many people think about, what's the color for China? They will say, oh, red, because, it's always red, red, red. But yes, you see a lot of red on the stage because Communist Party in all nations, they liked red, this bloody red color. In the education communism, red means blood. So they preferred this kind of red, but like that was not in the history of China, because in the history of China, bloody red was almost never used. We did like red color, but it was more like a dark red. It was like almost like a burgundy color, symbolized like it was a color for the royal family. But this kind of communist red, you only see them in modern China. You do not see them often in other countries like Taiwan. And I have to say, like in Taiwan, they preserved the traditional Chinese culture really well, because the first lady of Taiwanese President Song Meilin and his husband, the President Jiang Jianshi, they really liked traditional Chinese clothes. Song Meilin, actually, she passed away in New York when she was 106 years old. And throughout her life, she only wore qipao. She had hundreds of qipao, and she looked great on that. And she became a big promoter for Chinese qipao. And nowadays in Taiwan, most of the ladies still regard qipao as the official outfit of Taiwan or of China. And you see that that also greatly influenced Hollywood, because in the 1950s, actors in Hollywood already noticed that this kind of like Oriental beauty of qipao, and you see many celebrities wore this kind of dress. And even nowadays on the red carpet, you still see this qipao element very often. And they're beautiful, but still many Chinese people nowadays, they still miss the ancient old Chinese style for the Han Chinese. So in the past 10 years, I saw many clubs formed. Like, young Chinese people, they got together, they study the Han Chinese style. We call them Hanfu, like a Han Chinese clothes. And they designed this, like, according to what was shown in ancient paintings. They start to wear them in their social gatherings, and like in Taiwan, in New York, in Southern California. Actually, these pictures in Southern California. And there was even an international Chinese cultural competition in New York every year, like the Newtown Dynasty television. It's a Chinese global TV network, they actually organize this competition every year. They got like submissions from designers all over the world, and they had this competition, and some of the winning pieces even went to the New York Fashion Week. That was quite exciting to see this kind of element in New York Fashion Week. So I'm going to end my talk here. I want to thank the Shenyun Performing Arts. I've been watching the show in the past 10, 12 years every year, and I was very inspired by their traditional Chinese clothes in their costumes, because I realized they were very, very well researched. And every year I watched the show, I was very moved. I thought like maybe I should craft a show to tell people more about the history of Chinese attire. And when I crafted this talk, I read over 100 articles from the Chinese version of the Epoch Times. They had a section called traditional Chinese clothes. Like they documented like the details of many dynasties and their characters. And I want to thank for the great work they did. And I'm going to stop sharing my slide here. Thank you very much for being here. I hope we can have some open discussion. And happy Chinese New Year, or Lunar New Year. And you can unmute yourself and speak. Oh, someone asked where the recording will be posted. Yes, the Women in BBE, we are recording this, and we're going to post it on our website.